Daniel's wife died in a fire 3 years ago. 23 people died because of one greedy man. Today that man walked out of court free. No punishment. No justice. Daniel made a promise as he watched Victor Romano smile and light his cigar. Tonight, everything would change forever. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. The acrid scent of smoke clung to Daniel Ashford's tailored suit as he stood outside the imposing courthouse, his hands trembling with unbridled fury. The judge's pronouncement reverberated through his consciousness. Case dismissed due to insufficient evidence. 23 souls had perished in that devastating apartment inferno, including his beloved wife Emma and their unborn child, yet the perpetrator responsible for this catastrophe was walking away unscathed. Victor Romano, the avaricious landlord who had systematically disregarded every safety violation, every warning, every desperate plea from his impoverished tenants, emerged from the courthouse wearing a self-satisfied smirk. He adjusted his expensive silk tie with deliberate nonchalance and ignited a Cuban cigar, as though celebrating his triumph over justice itself. "This transgression shall not conclude here," Daniel proclaimed, his voice hoarse with grief and seething indignation. Victor pivoted, his glacial eyes meeting Daniel's burning gaze. "On the contrary, Mr. Ashford. You possess nothing remaining. No family, no legal recourse, no hope whatsoever. Learn to embrace your defeat gracefully." As Victor's opulent limousine vanished into the bustling metropolitan thoroughfare, Daniel made a solemn, silent oath. If the judicial system would not deliver justice, he would personally orchestrate Victor Romano's downfall. He would systematically dismantle the man who had obliterated his existence. For 3 grueling years, Daniel metamorphosed into a man entirely consumed by vengeance. He utilized his considerable expertise as an investigative journalist to excavate every sordid detail of Victor's extensive business empire. He uncovered corruption, bribery, and countless safety violations spanning Victor's entire property portfolio. Yet each time Daniel believed he possessed sufficient evidence to prosecute, Victor's exceptionally expensive legal team discovered methods to make the charges evaporate. Daniel's world contracted and darkened progressively. He lost his prestigious position for becoming obsessively fixated on the Romano investigation. He liquidated his house, his luxury automobile, every possession he owned to finance his relentless pursuit. Friends and family attempted to provide assistance, but Daniel systematically alienated them all. Revenge had become his sole remaining purpose, the only motivation that sustained his existence. On a particularly sweltering summer afternoon, Daniel sat in his deteriorating minuscule apartment, surrounded by countless files and photographs documenting Victor's extensive criminal activities. His telephone rang persistently, but he ignored it completely. He now ignored everything except his singular mission to destroy the man who had stolen everything meaningful from his life. An unexpected knock at his door interrupted his concentration. He wasn't anticipating any visitors. Through the peephole, he observed a young woman with exhausted eyes, grasping the hands of 2 small children. She appeared desperate and thoroughly frightened. Daniel opened the door reluctantly. "What do you require?" "Please, sir," the woman said, her voice trembling with desperation. "I apologize profusely for disturbing you, but we have absolutely nowhere else to go. The landlord evicted us this morning without warning. We've been wandering the streets all day, and the children are completely exhausted. Could we possibly rest in your hallway for just a few minutes? Only until we determine our next course of action." Daniel's initial instinct was to refuse. He didn't have time for other people's complications. However, something about the woman's dignified bearing despite her desperate circumstances reminded him powerfully of Emma, not in physical appearance, but in the way she maintained her composure even when facing impossible odds. "What is your name?" he inquired. "Maria Santos. These are my daughters Sophia and Carmen." The 2 girls, approximately 6 and 4 years old, gazed up at him with enormous, dark eyes filled with innocence. They were clearly exhausted and malnourished. "Who is your landlord?" Daniel asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Victor Romano," Maria replied bitterly. "I worked double shifts at the hospital to pay rent consistently, but when I contracted pneumonia and missed 2 days of work, I fell behind on payments. He refused to listen to my explanation or consider my circumstances. He simply discarded us onto the street like worthless garbage." Daniel felt his heart cease beating momentarily. Here, standing at his threshold, was another victim of the man who had systematically destroyed his life. For an instant, he saw not Maria and her daughters, but Emma and the child they would never have the opportunity to raise. Please enter, he said quietly. Maria hesitated uncertainly. I don't wish to impose upon your generosity. We merely need a few minutes to recuperate. Please enter, Daniel repeated, stepping aside graciously. His apartment was chaotic with papers and investigative files, but Maria made no commentary. She simply located a corner where her daughters could sit comfortably and expressed her gratitude softly. The girls were remarkably well behaved, sitting quietly despite their obvious hunger and complete exhaustion. When did you last consume food? Daniel asked with growing concern. Yesterday morning, Maria admitted reluctantly. I spent our remaining money on bus transportation, hoping to locate a shelter with available space. Unfortunately, everywhere is completely full. Daniel observed the two little girls, their gaunt faces and weary eyes, and felt something fracture inside his chest. He had been so intensely focused on his revenge that he had forgotten what it felt like to witness someone else's suffering and actually care. He went to his kitchen and prepared sandwiches with the last of his food supplies. As the girls ate hungrily, he found himself inquiring about their lives. Sophia aspired to become a physician like her mother, who worked as a registered nurse. Carmen loved to sing and dreamed of performing on stage professionally someday. Mama works extraordinarily hard, Sophia said with serious maturity. She takes care of sick people all day, then comes home and takes care of us. She's the most wonderful mama in the entire world. Maria's eyes filled with tears at her daughter's words. I'm not performing such an excellent job currently, Mija. I can't even provide you with a place to sleep safely. It's not your fault, Mama, little Carmen said, climbing into her mother's lap. The cruel man made us leave. But we'll find somewhere new to live. We always manage somehow. Daniel watched this exchange, and for the first time in 3 years, he contemplated something other than revenge. Here was a family torn apart by the same man who had destroyed his life, but instead of being consumed by hatred, they were clinging to each other with unconditional love. Tell me about Victor Romano, Daniel said to Maria. What kind of landlord was he? Maria's face darkened with remembered pain. The absolute worst kind imaginable. The building had no heating in winter, no air conditioning in summer. The elevator never functioned properly. There were rats and cockroaches everywhere. When tenants complained about conditions, he would threaten to evict them immediately. When I asked him to repair the broken window in our apartment, he said I should be grateful to have any roof at all. Did you know about the fire 3 years ago? Daniel asked carefully. The one on Maple Street? Of course. 23 people died because he wouldn't install proper fire exits or smoke detectors. It was absolutely horrific. Maria paused, studying Daniel's face intently. Wait, you look familiar. Did you lose someone in that fire? Daniel nodded, unable to speak for several moments. My wife Emma. She was pregnant with our first child. Maria's hand flew to her mouth in shock. Oh my God. I remember now. You're the journalist who tried to bring him to court. I followed the case religiously. I'm so terribly sorry for your loss. He walked free, Daniel said bitterly. No consequences whatsoever. No justice served. But you never surrendered, Maria said softly. I read all your articles. You kept fighting for those people even when everyone else forgot about them completely. Daniel looked around his apartment, at the obsessive collection of evidence that had consumed his entire existence. I haven't been fighting for them. I've been fighting for personal revenge. Perhaps, Maria said thoughtfully. But the result is identical. You've documented everything he's done wrong. All his crimes, all his victims. That requires tremendous courage. That night, Daniel allowed Maria and the girls to sleep in his bedroom while he remained awake looking through his files. But for the first time in 3 years, he wasn't searching for ways to destroy Victor Romano. He was looking for ways to help his victims. The following morning, Daniel made a decision that would transform everything. Instead of using his evidence to seek personal revenge, he would use it to help every family that Victor had wronged. I have a proposition, he told Maria over breakfast. But I need your assistance. Daniel's plan was ambitious but fundamentally simple. He would organize all of Victor's victims into a comprehensive class action lawsuit. Not just for the fire, but for every safety violation, every illegal eviction, every act of negligence across Victor's entire empire. Maria became his partner in this mission. As a nurse, she knew many of Victor's tenants and former tenants personally. She helped Daniel reach out to families who had been too frightened or too impoverished to speak up before. Over the following months, something beautiful began to happen. Instead of working alone in his apartment, consumed by hatred, Daniel found himself surrounded by a community of people who had all been hurt by the same man. They shared their stories, supported each other emotionally, and slowly began to heal together. Sophia and Carmen became regular fixtures in Daniel's life. He helped Sophia with her homework, teaching her about science and medicine. He listened to Carmen sing, encouraging her dreams and telling her she possessed a beautiful voice. For the first time since Emma's death, Daniel remembered what it felt like to care about the future. The breakthrough came 6 months later. Daniel had gathered enough evidence and enough victims to build an absolutely unshakable case. But more importantly, he had built something else. A network of people who cared about each other and refused to let Victor Romano hurt anyone else. The day of the trial, Daniel stood outside the same courthouse where he had sworn revenge 3 years earlier. But everything was different now. He wasn't alone. Maria stood beside him, along with 50 other families who had found the courage to speak up. This time Victor Romano couldn't buy his way out of justice. The evidence was overwhelming, the victims too numerous to ignore. The judge sentenced him to 20 years in prison and ordered him to pay millions in compensation to his victims. But Daniel's real victory wasn't in the courtroom. It was in the community center that opened 6 months later, funded by the lawsuit settlement. The Emma Ashford Community Center provided free legal aid, emergency housing, and support services for low-income families. Maria became the center's director, using her nursing skills and her experience with Victor's victims to help other families in crisis. Sophia and Carmen grew up in the center, surrounded by people who cared about them and supported their dreams. Daniel returned to journalism but with a different focus. Instead of investigating crimes for personal revenge, he told stories about people who overcame hardship with grace and courage. He wrote about communities that came together to help their neighbors, about the power of ordinary people to create extraordinary change. On the 3rd anniversary of the community center's opening, Daniel stood in the main hall, watching Maria give a speech to a room full of families whose lives had been changed by their work together. Sophia, now 9, was helping serve refreshments to the guests. Carmen, 7, was entertaining the younger children with songs. "You know what I realized?" Maria said to Daniel after her speech. "When you first let us into your apartment that day, I thought you were saving us. But really we were saving each other." Daniel nodded, looking around the room at all the lives that had been touched by their work. On the wall hung a photo of Emma, surrounded by pictures of all the families they had helped. He had kept his promise to her memory, but not in the way he had originally planned. "Emma would have loved this," he said softly. "She would have been proud of you," Maria replied. "You took your pain and turned it into purpose. You took your anger and turned it into action. That's not easy to do." Little Carmen ran up to them, her face bright with excitement. Daniel, guess what? Mrs. Rodriguez's family just moved into their new apartment. The one with the safe windows and the working heat." Daniel scooped Carmen up in his arms, her joy infectious. "That's wonderful, little bird. Another family with a safe place to call home. Will you come see their apartment with us?" Carmen asked. "Mrs. Rodriguez wants to thank you again." "Of course," Daniel said, setting her down gently. As they walked through the center together, Daniel, Maria, Sophia, and Carmen, Daniel reflected on the journey that had brought them here. 3 years ago, he had been a man destroyed by loss, consumed by the need for revenge. He had been ready to sacrifice everything, including his own humanity, to bring down the man who had wronged him. But sometimes, the universe sends us exactly what we need when we need it most. Maria and her daughters hadn't just been victims seeking help. They had been teachers, showing him that there was another way to honor Emma's memory and find meaning in his loss. The fire that had taken Emma had also forged something new, a family bound not by blood but by shared purpose, a community dedicated to making sure no other family would suffer as they had suffered. That evening, as Daniel tucked Carmen into bed in the small apartment above the community center that had become his home, she asked him a question that made his heart swell with gratitude. "Daniel, are you happy now?" He thought about Emma, about the child they would never have, about the years of anger and pain that had nearly consumed him. Then he looked around at the life he had built with Maria and her daughters, at the community they had created together, at all the families who were safe and happy because they had chosen love over hatred. "Yes, little bird," he said, kissing her forehead. "I'm happy now." And for the first time since that terrible day 3 years ago, Daniel meant it completely. He had learned that the opposite of loss wasn't revenge, it was love. And sometimes, if we're brave enough to let go of our anger and open our hearts to the people who need us, we discover that healing comes not from destroying our enemies, but from building something beautiful from the ashes of our pain.